Welcome everybody to the lesson today. We are nearing the end of Acts, okay? We are in Acts chapter 27. When now was determined. So basically when they determined the right time, selling our to Italy. So in other words, we decided to sell to Italy, okay? Most people in the world will know what Italy is, okay? They delivered both Paul and certain other prisoners. So remember, this is continuation of the last chapter. Paul is still there with the other prisoners to a centurion named Julius of the cohort of Augustus. Okay, so cohort, spurious, a cohort, a 10th part of a legion. Okay, 10th part of a legion. So a legion is maybe 100 or 1,000 or something like that. So this would be a 10th of that. Okay. So basically, this centurion who received Paul, who received the prisoners, his name is Julius, and he is an associate in the group of Augustus. So under the authority of Augustus. This Augustus here would be a title of a Roman emperor. Okay. Then having boarded a ship of Adramyttium, which is belonging to Adramyttium, a port in Mysia. So I have to go pull up the map for that for you. Okay, guys. So I pulled up a couple maps. So if my computer stops being stubborn. So here's Italy. There's Rome, right? You see the little dot, Rome. Mediterranean Sea is this area right here. Israel's over there, okay? So as you see on the map here, Israel, Jerusalem, all that area is right over here. Lebanon, Syria, and all of that, right? This Turkey area, that would be today, Istanbul and everything, that would be where the Asia Minor and all of that stuff is. So basically, and I'm sorry that this is small, but if you could follow the mouse, most of the trips of the apostles were in this general area right here, okay, going along this coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and they ended up going all the way up into the upper parts of what would now be known as Turkey, okay, in the lower regions. Basically, like a lot of the cities along the coast and stuff is where they mainly hit. And Cyprus is in this little island cluster that you see right here. And what's saying is that they traveled, Paul, in this chapter, all the way over to Italy area, which is over here. That's a long way away. Like they basically had to go around Athens, around Greece, and sail all the way over to Italy, okay? Because that's what it says in the beginning. They're selling our to Italy, right? Is where they went. Now, we have Asia on the list, as you see on the words here, Asia, okay? Begin to sail to Asia, right? And we have also on the list is Mysia, I believe, in here somewhere. But we'll get to that, okay, as it comes up. So, they have boarded. Oh, that's what it was, Mysia. Where was it? Okay, so Adra meant the boat, right? Having boarded then a ship of Adramyttium, okay, is a port in Mysia, Asia Minor. So going to the thing, right there's Mysia, okay, as you see on the map. So we have Cyprus. So you can see on this map, you have Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea above it, okay? And on this smaller map in the corner, as you see the mouse, Jerusalem and Israel, if my mouse would stop messing up, is here, where I'm moving the little pointer. And then up above is the Asia Minor, and this is where you would have Cilicia and all of these cities that are larger. Okay, Lydia, Lycia, Cyprus, Crete, and Mysia is this little green circle this little green area that you see up here. That's Mysia. Okay, it's on the northwest tip of this peninsula. Stupid mouse. Okay, this northwest tip of peninsula. And a peninsula is a piece of land that's surrounded on three sides by water. Okay, and so this is where the boat is from. Okay, the boat that they're getting on. It's from that area. And being about to sail to along Asia places. So basically along the edge of this Asia right here, this Turkey, what would be known today as Turkey. So they're sailing along the edge or the coast of what would now be Turkey and Istanbul, and they're heading towards Italy. Okay, we set sail, being with us Aristarchus, a Macedonian, a person from Macedonia. Okay, and that's not on this list, but Macedonia would be up here near Thrace, and other areas. So Macedonia would be in this Turkey area that would be today. It's more of an upper area. Okay. And it's part of Thessalonica. Okay, guys, so I had to go pull up the map. So in the map that we've been following here is, as you see on this map I'm circling, there's Turkey. That's the coast that they're going around. Okay, they're in the Mediterranean Sea, near the Aegean Sea, because this upper part is the Mysia. Okay, up here, and that would be Asia Minor. Okay, Ephesus would be right about there. Okay, and they're traveling all up this area. And over here we have Philippi. Over here near Thessalonica we have Greece and all that stuff. Okay, so going back to the lesson, if my computer works, we have this Aristarchus, who is a Macedonian, a person, an inhabitant of Macedonia, and he's of Thessalonica. So let's go. So on the map, okay, Thessalonica is right here. Okay, that's what Thessalonica is. Macedonia would probably be the larger general area. And on this map, you see right here, down here, you have Thessalonica right there. Macedonia is indeed the larger area. So Macedonia would have been, back then, would have been where Greece is. But it's basically this big cluster of tan color that you see right here. All of that would have been Macedonia back then. Okay? So just so you have context of where we're at. And by the way, the word Thessalonica, first of all, that city actually is still there today. You can still go to Thessalonica today. It's still an actual city. And it's that group of people is where the books of the letters, the Thessalonians, goes to. Okay? Then, next day. So the next day, they landed at Sidon. Okay. Okay, so anyway, guys, for those that want to know, so they're going all this area. Okay, they just got done going up near Thessalonica. Now, a day later, they're headed back. They're back in Sidon. Sidon is in Lebanon. Okay, it's north of Israel, north of Jerusalem, and Galilee, and all of that. It's the northern area. It's where we get Tyre and Sidon. Okay, so they're back in Sidon, or headed back towards Sidon, in other words. And it says here, on the next day, we landed at Sidon. So they're actually at Sidon, back near Jerusalem. Considerately, then, Julius, Paul having treated, allowed him to his friends. So Julius allowed Paul to go and meet with his friends, having gone care to receive. So Paul went to receive care from them. And from there, having set sail, we sailed under Cyprus. Okay, so if I'm going back to the map here, Lebanon's there, right, as you see. So they set sail going back towards Cyprus, this little island in the Mediterranean Sea. Okay? Because of the winds being contrary, meaning against them, and then along to Cilicia and Pamphylia. Now I'm going to go and look, see if we can find more of Cilicia and Pamphylia and all that for you on these maps. So I'm looking for it. Okay, so I had to go to this map. So there's Cyprus, as you see on the little map. Okay, the little island right here. Cilicia and Pamphylia is right above it. One to the northwest, one to the northeast. And it's just west of Lycia. Okay, and that's where they ended up nearing next, as it says here. Then along Cilicia and Pamphylia. So along, not at. They didn't go into it, they just went along it. Having sailed across the sea, we came to Myria of Lycia. So Myria of Lycia. So going up to Cilicia, traveling along the coast to Pamphylia. Now they're in Lycia. Okay, on that map. Okay, Myra of Lycia. So Lycia, the general area. Myra, probably the city. And there have found the Centurion, a ship from Alexandria, that would be in Egypt, okay, sailing to Italy. So they found a ship, probably more like they traded ships, jumped from one ship to another, transferred, and now they're sailing to Italy, the original place where they were going. He placed us into it. Who placed us? Julius, because he's the one in charge. Us would be the people, okay? He placed us into it for many now days. So now, many days later, sailing slowly and with difficulty. So in other words, now they're traveling, but now they're traveling on the sea where they've been going the whole time. But now maybe it's storms arising, maybe the waves are against them or something, right? Whatever the difficulty is, they're moving very slowly. Having arrived off Cnidus. Now that's one I got to look for. So give me. Okay, so I found the map that we're looking for. Here's Cnidus, Rhodes, right there, Rhodes. Okay, and there's Cnidus. This red dot on, again, another peninsula. Okay, and if I'm looking at the map correctly and matching it up with the other maps, okay. So I have to find the map, so you have to forgive me as I switch back and forth here. So I'm looking at the map to kind of give you a general position. Okay, so this Cnidus, according to this map, it would be right there. Right there. So it's in the Sea of Crete. And I'm sorry I can't blow this up any higher, but if you see where the pointer is on the map here, on the video, when you watch the video, it's the same design, this little stick figure peninsula, which is north of this little island in the Sea of Crete. And if we match that up, see, it's the same stick figure, there's that. So this would be the Sea of Crete area that they're dealing with, okay? And it's the same on this tiny little thing. So you get the idea. Anyway, so that is where they are now. Anyway, so Cnidus not permitting us the winds, right? So they weren't able to stop in Cnidus, in other words. But that's general area where they are. We sailed under Crete. Going back to the map, we sailed under Crete. Okay. I gotta find Crete again. So, okay, so on this tiny little map right here, Crete is south of Corinth. It was actually southeast of Corinth and southwest of Ephesus. Okay, it's on that tiny little island right there. Okay, so they're still in this Mediterranean Sea, Sea of Crete, and actually the Sea of Crete. So Crete, where they're headed, is right there. So they were right over here, trying to get there, and because the winds were not permitting, they ended up having to go over near to Crete. Okay. We sailed under Crete. So what it means by under Crete is that they sailed on the bottom half of Crete. So they sailed under Crete. Okay. So underneath the island. Now, obviously, on a map, it's not like you're actually under the island. It's south of the island. So they sailed along the south portion of the island, off Salame, okay, Salame, or Salome, and I would assume that Salome, but I want to give you the actual place. Okay. All right, guys, so I found a map that would be the closest we have for Salome. So they sailed underneath Crete, the island, right? And Salome is this great area here on this map, okay? So you have Salome right there, okay? And so I clicked on it, actually. So let me click off it. So you have Salome right there, okay? The gray area. It is to the west of Judea. It's to the west of Jerusalem, to the west of Jericho, to the south of Samaria, and Caesarea. Okay, so this grayed off area on this map is, so now they're headed back near Jerusalem, Bethlehem, all of that stuff, along the coast of where they originally were. Okay, and this grayed off area, that's where Salome is. Okay, so as it says, not permitting means that the winds did not allow us to get to Cnidus. We sailed under Crete off of Salome. They weren't in Salome, off of Salome. With difficulty and coasting along it, we came to a place certain called Fair Havens, okay, to which near was the city of Lasea. Okay, so we're back with the recording. Okay, so this is the best I could give you, which is that Fair Havens is on the south coast of Crete, so they're actually still in the Crete area, okay, but they were headed over towards area. So they're kind of giving you like a general context. Anyway, as you see here, it says Fair Havens is on the south coast of Crete, about 5 miles east of Cape Matala. Okay. It's the most southerly point of the island. It's this little tiny point right there. There's Fair Havens. There's Lasea, okay, on the map. Okay. The haven was not accommodated at winter time, so they ended up in Lasea, okay, near the city of Lasea. They weren't in it, but they ended up near it, near the city of Lasea. Much now time having passed, so a lot of time passed by, okay, and being already dangerous, meaning the voyage that they took was dangerous, because of even the fast. The word fast here is Nestian, the fasting, the Day of Atonement. Talk about the Jewish Day of Atonement. Okay. Don't know when that is, but it's a Jewish holiday, abstinence of fasting, a day of fasting. Basically, that holiday was coming soon because of the long trip that was taken. Already being over, so the fasting had already been over. It was already done. Even the fast already being over, that's what it means. Already being over, it's done. So they missed the fasting, okay, and was admonishing them. The word admonishing means to admonish, exhort, advise. Okay. Then Paul saying to them, men, I understand that with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo, so they lost the cargo of the ship, but also the lives of us, is about to be the voyage. But the centurion by the pilot and the ship owner rather was persuaded then by the things of Paul spoken, by the words that Paul has spoken, unsuitable now the harbor, meaning where they wanted to land, being to winter in. So that's telling you directly, just as what he said before, they were not able to go into the harbor because of the winter time, because of maybe ice or anything like that. So they weren't able to reach this. Unsuitable. The majority reached a decision, so they made a vote to set sail from there, where they were, if somehow they might be able, having arrived to Phoenix, to winter there, a harbor of Crete. So still the same island of Crete. Okay? Looking toward. So let's go to the map and see if it says, what was the name of the Phoenix? We don't have Phoenix on the map, but I would assume it would be off to the right of Lycia. Okay? Looking toward the southwest and towards the northwest. So now they're like, okay, where can we land this boat? We're in trouble. We're in danger. We're scared of possibly losing our lives and stuff. Let's try to find a place to land. Now we go to verse 13. The storm at sea. So there was a storm that was happening. Having blown gently now, so gently, softly, a south wind, having thought the purpose to have obtained, having weighed, that means anchored, that they dropped anchor, very near, they begin coasting along Crete, coasting along the edge. And what it means by coasting is that when you take a boat and you go along the very edge of land, what you're doing is you're coasting. But coasting in this way also means that they dropped the sails. So they were just letting, they dropped the sails, but also they're letting nature carry them. Most boats had row sticks to row, and most boats also had sails. So they weighed, okay, anchor, they dropped anchor, take away or remove, raise up or lift. So lifting up the anchor, not dropping it, okay, and began coasting along the creek. So they're letting nature carry them. A soft wind. Not long after, however, there came down from it, from this storm, a wind tempestuous. The word here for wind tempestuous is, and people in Philippines might know this word very well, Typhoon Nikos, which is where they get the word typhoon. Okay, very part of this word is, start of it is typhoon. So Typhoon Nikos, a violent, tempestuous, stormy storm. Okay, so a very violent storm. So in other words, the winds that were soft at first and gentle now were raised up, called the northeaster. So the storm was called the northeaster. Now that's a term that they still use today, northeaster. It's an east-northeast wind. Okay, and it's from Eurus and Clodon, a storm from the east. In other words, okay, northeaster. Having been caught, then the ship, that now this ship that they're in is in the grip of this storm, and not being able to face the wind. Okay, not being able to face the wind, having given way, we were driven along an island. Then, so they're being pushed along this island, certain, having run under, called Kadao. Now, if we go to the map, you will see right there's Lycia. Okay, right there's Fair Havens. Cadao is right here. So the storm is taking place in this general area of. Oh, by the way, there's Phoenix, just so you know. So they're sailing along the coast, going up to Phoenix. Okay, but the wind in this area, okay, is pushing them, and it's pushing them down. So they end up down near Kaudia or Kada, okay, an island near Crete, and they were able with difficulty. So they were actually able with difficulty, although they were able to do it, it was still difficult for them to do it, to control, to gain of the lifeboat. Lifeboat would be a boat that would be attached to a bigger boat, and this lifeboat would be, as we know today, would be used if your main boat got in big trouble, so you would jump into the lifeboat and you would abandon ship. So they gained the lifeboat, which, having taken up supports, then being using undergirding here would be as to strengthen a ship against the waves. Okay. However they strengthened the ship, they made it to where it was able to support. The ship, fearing then, leased into the sandbars, meaning they didn't want to run into the sandbars of Syrtis. Okay. So Syrtis is probably like the sand area around this Kaudia or Kada, okay, island. Sandbars, obviously, anybody who knows weather and knows sailing knows that a sandbar is where you have a lot areas in the ocean where it's very shallow and you could get stuck, right? And the Syrtis is where they don't want to be. So Syrtis Major is Great Bay of the north coast of Africa. So now north coast of Africa. They didn't want to run into this north coast of Africa sandbar. They should fall, meaning sink. Having lowered the gear, thus they were driven along violently. So they were being pushed, but it was very violent. A lot of shaking, a lot of tossing and turning. Now, being storm-tossed, right, of us, on the next day, a jettison of cargo, okay, jettison, a throwing out to lighten the ship. So they jettisoned, they threw out the cargo that was with them. They began to make, and on the third day, with their own hands, the tackle of the ship. The tackle is the fittings, the equipment, the furniture in the ship. Not furniture like couch, chair, but furniture like what you sit on, or just anything that's not attached to the boat directly. They threw out. They cast away, threw it out. Neither now sun nor stars appeared for many days. So the storm was so strong, and it was so the storm was so strong, and it was so powerful that this storm made the skies cloudy. You weren't able to see the sun, even though it was daytime, or the stars if it was night, appearing for many days. Tempest, that would be the storm, and no small lying on us. So this storm was not small. It was a big one. From then on was abandoned hope. So the hope of the people in the boat started to vanish. They were like, we're doomed, what are we going to do? Okay. All being saved of us. Much also, time without food. So not only are their hope that they have is dying out, they have no food, time without food. They're being at that time, so they didn't have any food. Now what happens? Having stood up, Paul. So Paul stands up in the midst of it, meaning in the presence. Now, me personally, I don't think that would necessarily be needed because you're in a boat. There's not likely much other place that these people could be. So saying Paul in the midst of them is like saying, well, hey, you're on a boat with a bunch of people. It's not like the bunch of people could be someplace else, other than in the water. So I personally don't think saying Paul in the midst of them would be needed, but I do understand the context. Right? Paul stood up in front of them, basically. He said, it behooves me, ideo, it's necessary, in other words. It is necessary, indeed, O men, having been obedient to me, meaning that the men in the boat were listening to what Paul was giving instructions of, because he's a believer. They're like, hey, God's with him, let's trust him, right? Being obedient to me. How so? Not to have set sail from Crete. So, in other words, at some point, Paul was like, hey, we shouldn't go here. We might be in trouble of a disaster. Okay. To have incurred then the disaster, this, and the loss. And now we've dealt with a different disaster and loss. We lost much stuff. And yet, now, I exhort you, hera ino, to admonish, to advise, or exhort. Okay, advise would be the word here. I advise you to keep up your courage. So, now notice what he says. I advise you directly to keep your courage up. That means you have to manually lift up your courage, okay? Loss of life, none. We're not going to have any loss of life. There's not going to be any people that's going to die. We might lose things in this boat, but we're not going to lose any life. Loss of life, none. There will be no loss of life. From among you, only of the ship stood by for me this night. Okay, so we're in the ship of God, whose am I whom, and I serve. Right, so this God that's with me, I serve him. The word God here is theou. Okay, I, ego. Interesting that word is Greek, is ego for I, which fits perfectly because anytime you are self-centered, ego is there. And he says, whom I serve, latrio, if I'm saying it right, and we have to serve, especially God, I worship, I minister, okay? An angel, angelos, a messenger of God, saying, not fear Paul. So the angel is speaking to Paul in his dream, I believe, or to him at night, saying, Paul, do not fear. It says, Caesar, it behooves. It is necessary for you to go before Caesar, to stand before, and behold, has granted to you, God, all those sailing with you. Granted to you. In other words, the life of these people that are with you are not going to leave. Therefore, take courage, men. So now Paul's like, okay, I heard from God. God said no one's going to die. It's beneficial, necessary that we go before Caesar. So God is protecting us. None of us are going to die. So because of the promise of God, take courage, have faith. Men, I believe for God, theou. Okay. In this one, it's theo. It's no U at the end of it. So right there you see it. Theo. Same one as above. A deity, especially a supreme deity. That is the word that they usually use for any God, type of God. Theou, okay? Theos, all of that. That thus it will be according to the way, right? According to the way, according to the group of believers, the way, people of the way, it has been said to me, upon an island, however, it behooves it's necessary us to fall. So we need to land. So where are they landing? Malta. Malta is where they are landing. All right, guys, so I'm back after pulling up the map. So we have two different maps. So here's the northern part of Africa, right? There's Spain and France and Italy. Rome is in Italy. Malta is this little tiny red island right there. So where were they sailing? Crete and all that. South of Eastern Europe. Okay, so the area where all of this stuff is going on, where they're trying to sail to and stuff, is they're trying to go along the coast of what is Eastern Europe. And all of those cities, Thessalonica and all that, that would have been in the Eastern Europe area, the southern portion of Eastern Europe today on the map. Now, you're not going to see it because of the border, but you can see still on the map, there's Eastern Europe. The area where they were before is off to this direction. Okay? Anyway, looking at this tiny map, you can see here, Malta is right there, okay, on this map. There's Europe. Now, this would be a better one for you to see. So right here, okay, so we have Lebanon, Israel. That's where Bethlehem and all that is in the Middle East. Okay, Syria. Turkey is where the this Turkey area right here that you see that I'm pointing at. That's where Thessalonica and all that stuff would be in. This tiny little green dot right here that I'm pointing at, that's where the Crete is. Okay, and Crete. Actually, that's not where Crete at. And now we have this other island is where they were right there, where they were going, and Mediterranean Sea, and we have this area right here, okay, where they were going along, and now they are here, Malta, right there where that little arrow is pointing, which is just north of Libya, okay, and it's just north of being part of Africa. So it's in between Europe and Africa is where they ended up landing, shipwrecked. Okay? And it's just, this Malta area is just south, as you see on this map right here. It's just south of Italy. Okay? So Italy's right there, that large boot-looking thing. And Malta is right there, right smack on the western side of the Mediterranean Sea. Okay? So, shipwrecked on Malta is the next section of this chapter. When then 14th night, so after 14 nights have come, okay, have driven about of us in the Adriatic Sea, going back to the map, right, Adriatic Sea, which would be part of this Mediterranean Sea, for the most part, right? Just so you know. Toward the middle of the night, right, which would be somewhere around midnight, roughly, middle of the night, began sensing the sailors to be drawing near, some to the land. In other words, they were able to sense the land was nearby. And having taken soundings would be dropping. So what a sounding is, if we look at it here, the word, bolissantis, a sounding, okay, is they cast a line and it has some sort of heavy weight on it. And they let the weight sink the line, and then they get to gather how far down the seabed is. Okay, so it's like as you move along, you drop this thing and see how far it goes down. And if you notice that each time you pull it up, that how far down the seabed is less and less, it means you're drawing near to land. Okay, so that's what they mean. Having found soundings, they found fathoms 20. So fathoms 20. Now that's one that we don't know. So I pulled it up for you. So 20 fathoms in feet is 120 feet deep. So they tested the waters at the first time in this section, and they found it to be 120 feet deep. Okay, and then a little further along, they took a sounding and found it to be 15 fathoms. So let's go to 15 fathoms in the calculator, which would be 90 feet. So you see the first it was 120, now it's 90. Okay. Fearing then lest somewhere on the rocky places we might fall, meaning that the boat would be broken up by the rocks, out of the stern, the front of the boat, having cast anchors 4. So they dropped not just one anchor, but 4 anchors. They were praying for day to come. So, hey, dear God, please, let day come. Of the then sailors seeking to flee out of the ship. They wanted to abandon the ship, jump over. and having let down the lifeboat into the sea under pretense, as from the bow, anchors, bow, right? So we have bow, just so you learn a little bit, bow is the forward part of the vessel, is the bow, okay? The stern here is the stern of a ship, like the very front tip of a ship, I believe. Being about to cast out, said Paul to the centurion and soldiers, if not these remain in the ship, you will be saved not. In other words, men, I know you want to jump out of the boat. You're scared of the rocks. You're scared of the boat crashing into the rocks. But he says to the centurion, to the one in charge, and to the soldiers, remain in the ship, or you will not be saved. Okay? Are able. Then cut away the soldiers the ropes of the lifeboat. So they cut away the rope. They're like, hey, okay, we have to trust them. It sounds crazy, but we have to trust them. And they allowed her to fall away. Okay? Until then, that day was about to come. So it was just beginning to become daytime again. Kept urging Paul all to partake of food, saying the 14th day. So they had some sort of reserves of food. Okay. Remember, they had been fasting. Or they, not really fasting, but they were without food. Now somehow they got some portion of food at some point. How? I don't know. But it says, the 14th day is today. Watching without eating, you continue nothing having taken. Therefore, I exhort you, I encourage you to take food, trophis, this indeed for you, for your preservation. Is not one for of you a hair of your head will perish. Right? God is looking out for you, in other words. Having said now these things, and having taken bread, so that's what they had, food, bread. He gave thanks to God, okay, before everybody that was in the boat, and having broken it, that would be the bread, he began to eat, and encouraged them, having been all also of them took food and ate as well. We were then the altogether souls in the ship. So how many souls were in the ship? 276. So it's not a boat of 5, 8 people. It's a boat that has 276 people in the boat. That's a lot of people. And having been filled then with food. Now notice that, okay? The bread that they broke, that they somehow had, after being unable to have food for a while, right? The bread that they had, it was not just enough to give them something to eat, but it filled them up, full, okay? Notice the words, bread. Okay? Bread of life, Christ. Having filled, being full. Where else do we see this same concept of being filled and being full of bread? We see that in the miracles of Jesus. Not only when Jesus broke the bread and the fish did they have food to eat, but they had leftovers. Okay. Now in this case, they were simply filled then with food. They begin to lighten the ship, casting out the wheat into the sea. So what was in the boat with them? Wheat. How do you make bread? Wheat. See? Everything comes together when you pay attention. When now day, so now it's daytime, okay? It was the land not. They did recognize a bay. So they didn't recognize the land that they were about to land at. They had probably never been there. But they recognized a bay, however, certainly. They noticed a bay, an area to land. They noticed having a shore, right, on which they determined if they should be able to drive the ship. Drive the ship, which means that you basically steer the ship until it runs right into the dirt. Okay, drive the ship. And the anchors having cut away, because they didn't have any anchors, remember, they left them in the sea. At the same time, having loosened the ropes of the rudders. Now, this would probably mean that they had some way of tying the rudders, the little steerings at the end of the boat, so that the boat wouldn't be all over the place. And having hoisted the foresail, the sail, hoisted it, meaning bring it up, to the blowing wind, they begin making for the shore. So they raised the sail, which means that the sail prior to this was down. Okay? So now they're raising it up, and they're letting the wind push them to the shore. Having fallen, however, into a place between two seas, right, they ran aground. So although they were trying to make it to the shore, they ran aground in between two different seas, okay, like the edge of one sea to the other. Now, this would not, obviously, it would not mean like going from room to room. It would be different parts of different seas. As anybody with common sense knows, when you're in the sea, although on a map it shows this is this sea, this is that sea, when you're in the sea, you don't tell which one's which. You can't really tell. But they knew that general area of where they were. So they go, okay, here's where we are. We're in between these two different named seas. They ran aground. It means their boat ran onto land. And the vessel, and indeed bow, having struck first, it remained immovable. That means the boat was not able to be moved. And the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. So the boat is jammed into this running aground, whatever is probably sand or rocks or whatever. Okay? And as the boat is jammed in there, the waves is tossing and turning, going like this, maybe side to side or back and forward, and it's breaking up the stern of the boat, which means that sooner or later that boat would be broken and they would sink by the violence of the waves. Of thou now soldiers. So the soldiers had a plan, was that the prisoners they should kill. So the soldiers were like, hey, let's kill the prisoners, all of them. Let's kill them. So that everyone else can escape. Okay? At least anyone having swum away. Now that would tell you why they wanted to kill the prisoners. It wasn't because, hey, we don't want to sink, because the boat has already run aground and it's already starting to break up. It tells you what. They should kill at least any have swum away. In other words, we don't want people to escape. Okay? The idea here is that in that culture, if you were in like a soldier, or if you were in command of prisoners and your prisoner escaped, your life was taken in place of that prisoner. Okay? But the centurion, desiring to save Paul, hindered them, meaning he stopped them. He's like, hey, don't kill anybody. Right? Of the purpose that they had, which was the purpose to kill them, because they were afraid that the prisoners would escape. The centurion commanded them, those being able to swim, having cast themselves off first on the land, to go out. So, hey, whoever can swim, go. Okay? Get out of the boat and go. And the rest, some indeed on boards. That means that ones that maybe didn't know how to swim rested their bodies on boards of wood and probably used it like I'm trying to think of what this I got in my head, but I can't think about it. A longboard, a surfer. Okay, so they're surfing on the board and trying to make it to land. So maybe laying on the board on their belly, using their hands to move towards the thing. Some then on things from the ship. So some on boards, some on other things from the ship. And thus it came to pass that all were brought safely to the Lord. Now remember the order of God, what was happening. God said, hey, I'm with you. No life will be lost. And yet here it is. The sailors want to kill, right, people, which would have then made God's word wrong. And obviously God would not allow his word to be wrong. So he ministered to Paul and the centurion to stop the killing. Therefore, God's word happened exactly as it was. Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of Acts chapter 27. I will be back at a later time with Acts chapter 28, which is the last book of Acts. So thank you for your time.